in mind. Do you get it? Somehow, in some way, the wife of Simon of Cyrene became a mother to Paul the Apostle. So what is going on here is backstory, back history to the early history of the church in the Roman world. And it's a fascinating story. One other piece. In 1941, they were digging in the old city of Jerusalem when they broke into a tomb. And in that tomb, they found a bone box. When you were buried in the time of Jesus, you were placed on a shelf in the tomb, and after a year, the family would come in and gather your bones and put them in a bone box. And a number of these bone boxes have stuff written on them. The most famous one you've likely heard of is James, brother of Jesus, the James ossuary from about 10 years ago. But in 1941, they found another ossuary, another bone box. And this bone box actually had a whole bunch of writing on it because the writer was trying to get it right. We can see where he scratched out words or letters. He obviously didn't write very well. Literacy was not a common skill in the first century. He tried 3 times to write what he finally got right. And the words are these: Alexandros Simon, in Greek, no less, in a Jewish-speaking city, Alexander, the son of Simon. So, in Paul's letter to the Romans, and on a hillside in Jerusalem, we actually have got a connection from the past to the present between Simon of Cyrene and us. We have found the bones of one of his sons. And Paul praises the other son as an outstanding Christian, whose mother not only was the mother of Alexander and Rufus, but was also a mother of the Apostle Paul. But you know, that makes a great story. It's wonderful. It thrills the cockles of my heart. But you've got to stop and think about it. And step back and do a little analysis before you realize the impact of what's going on in the story. It didn't start that way. It didn't start that way. And that's why Mark paints the picture of Simon of Cyrene at the front of the painting that he's painting, so that we would see it first. It's up front in our face. And the death of Jesus and the trial of Jesus is the backdrop to what is happening. The most important character at this point in Mark's story is not Jesus. It's Simon. And there's several things we need to know as we look at this painting, as we read this story. We need to realize, first of all, that Simon was an outsider. He was an accidental part of what was going on. He shouldn't have even been there. He didn't live there. He was from Cyrene. Anybody know where Cyrene was? Where it is today? Oh yeah, you do. Cyrene's been all over the news for the last couple of years. Canadian Armed Forces were involved in action against the modern Cyrenes, the most infamous of whom was Omemee-Bethel. Cyrene was ancient Libya. Talk about being an outsider. That's where Simon was from. He wasn't part of the Jerusalem community. He was an African from Cyrene, from Libya. And did you notice how Mark writes the story? He just happened to be passing by. He was an accidental participant in the story when a Roman soldier likely put a spear in his belly, grabbed him with a hand on the shoulder of his cloak, and yanked him into the line. Simon was the accidental person in the story. He had no reason to be there, and if truth be told, he probably didn't want to be there. He was forced to carry the patibulum That part of the cross that weighs about 200 pounds that Jesus could no longer carry because of torture. He was compelled, requisitioned. Can you imagine how that would feel? We're so used to freedom. We like to feel we can get in our cars and drive where we want to go, and we do. But can you imagine? Let's take Sam, for example, or myself, who were ex-police officers. If we had had the power in our day to walk up to you, grab you by the shoulder, and say, drive me around for the evening. Or, I'm going to Peterborough. I don't want to spend the gas money. You take me to Peterborough, and you bring me back. Boy, I'll tell you, the RCMP would have more scandal on his hands than it already has if Sam had acted like that when he was in uniform. We don't allow our police or our soldiers to take guns and stick them in our stomachs and force us to do what we don't want to do. But that was Simon's story. He was forced at the point of a spear, edge of a sword, to carry Jesus' cross. And so put yourself in Simon's shoes. I'll bet you he was muttering under his breath. He was likely fuming that he had to do what he didn't want to do. Don't forget, he was the accidental participant. He was on his way somewhere. His journey was interrupted rudely and forcibly, and he was compelled to carry Jesus' cross. So stop and think about the implication of that. Church history tells us that Simon's wife became a mother to the Apostle Paul. Paul tells us that his son Rufus was an outstanding leader of one of the congregations, of the 8 congregations in first century Rome. An outstanding Christian leader. And here's Simon being forced to carry Jesus' cross, muttering under his breath, likely wishing all of the curses he could think of on the Roman soldier who so interrupted his journey. But something happened to Simon between that point and when he got to Golgotha. And that something was Jesus. Something happened in that encounter with a beaten, broken man that so transformed Simon's life that his family became very, very devout followers of the one who was crucified. And that doesn't make any sense at all. At all. Because Simon knew full well the only reason that Jesus was being crucified was that Jesus had done something wrong. They only crucified criminals. Simon had no grounds to jump to the conclusion that Jesus was any different. And yet somehow, in the mystery of God's providence, Simon saw what was really going on. And it changed his life. It changed the life of his wife. It changed the life of his son, Rufus. And the probability is that Alexander became a leader of the church in Jerusalem. That's the power of an encounter with Jesus, even when Jesus is broken and so weak that he cannot carry his cross anymore. That's a powerful story. And that's what this story is all about. And that's a Father's Day story. Because you see, because Simon didn't stay in that angry, resentful, cursing spot, but was open to finding out what really happened, and somehow, in some mysterious way we know nothing about, had an encounter with Jesus of Nazareth, the condemned criminal. It changed Simon's life. It changed, dare I say, the Apostle Paul's life. He found a mother when he no longer had one. And because it changed Paul's life, it changed our lives. Because the New Testament church is founded on the writings of the Apostle Paul, on Paul's missionary activities. So this incidental story, that's just 1-2 sentences in the middle of a crucifixion scene, is highly important. That's why Mark paints it at the front of the picture. You know, Jesus once said the day would come when you just might have to take up a cross and follow him. You know what? The first person who ever did it was a man by the name of Simon of Cyrene, who didn't choose to do it, was compelled to do it by a Roman soldier. But it made all the difference in the world. So there was a young man who grew up in the Depression. His father worked in the local textile mill. They were lucky that he had a job at all. And many a night, there wasn't much on the table for supper. But the young boy had noticed that his dad had an unusual habit. Every evening before his dad would go to bed, his dad would pull out his pockets of his trousers and get all the loose change in his trousers, and he'd put it in a pickle jar by the head of the bed. The boy watched his dad do this night after night, and the pennies would mount up, and there might be the odd dime and quarter in there, and soon the pickle jar would be full. And then his dad would patiently sit by the coal oil lantern and would roll the money, teach his son how to roll the money. And then they would get in the old dilapidated pickup truck that was held together by baling wire, and they'd drive into town to the local bank. Ah, that was a special day for the young boy, because after his dad had put the money in the bank, he always asked the teller to keep back 10 pennies. And those 10 pennies would buy the little boy a vanilla ice cream cone, and would buy the dad a chocolate ice cream cone. And they would share the 2 ice cream cones. Well, the boy began to be looking forward to this event of sharing a 5-cent ice cream cone. For those of you who don't know and can't remember, but I'm sure some of you can, 5 cents went a lot further in the 1930s than it does today. He looked forward to those events. And when the boy got a little bit older, he began to ask his dad why he was putting money in the pickle jar. One night when the dad almost had nothing on his plate to eat, the boy had more to eat than the father, because the father wanted it that way. The father said to his young boy, he said, "John," he said, "you will never work in this textile mill." He said, "Every penny that goes in that bank is going to pay for you to go to college someday. You will never work in this textile mill." Well, they made many trips to town, and much money went into the bank in the form of pennies. And the young boy went to college, and the young boy never worked in that textile mill. As time went on, his father aged and retired, lived in poor circumstances, but the boy loved to come home and be with his dad. The boy got married, had a young child, and it was going to be the first time that the young child would come home to see Grandma and Grandpa. And by this time, the pickle jar was gone. It had disappeared, become a distant memory. And they came home, and as they were visiting, the baby needed to be changed, and so the grandmother offered the bed, her husband's and her bed, to lay the baby on to change. So Susan picked up the baby and went into the bedroom, the parents' bedroom, and changed the baby, and Susan came back with her tears running down her face. She took John by the hand and led him into the bedroom. There at the foot of the bed was the pickle jar, already half full of pennies. What lasts is what you pass on. All the rest is smoke and mirrors. I invite you